But I'm the president of an organization called Color Us United. And our mission is to return America to its principles of excellence, those principles right now are being threatened by an ideology that claims to help the oppressed in the name of what is known as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But unfortunately only leads to the lowering of standards across people's lives. And Dr. Zama will speak to this because he is in the one profession where people uniquely recognize where that excellence, the most competent doctor, is what's needed. And he will speak to that and attest to that in his own testimony. But if you guys are further interested in following up and helping out and supporting the cause, I would encourage you to go to colorusunited.org. So with all that being said, and without further ado, we'd like to welcome Dr. Nche Zama.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here today. And first up, I apologize for arriving late. I was a victim of the air flight industry and flight cancellations. But as is always said, better late than never. And so it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank everybody, Kenny and the organization for inviting me here. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking some time off your personal daily schedules to be here this evening. And I appreciate it. And it's always great to be among people and discuss issues that are very important to all our lives, and most importantly to the lives of the future generations. And I'm glad to be here. Beautiful geography. This is actually my second visit here. Several years ago, I was in this region attending a meeting at Duke University on heart failure. And it's great to be back. And a little bit about my background, where I came from, what journey took me to the point where I can stand in front of you today to chat about things that are important to all of us. I was actually born in a tiny National Geographic village in a country called Cameroon in West Central Africa, up in the mountains. And I was raised in that grass hut village by two very loving and very caring disciplinarians, I call them, my parents. And we lived in that hut, and I was taught many great things that would help me out later on in life. I was taught to work hard. You couldn't be lazy in a village. We didn't have refrigerators. We didn't have all the amenities that you grew up knowing here. So if you went to the farm, you better not play. You got to work hard and bring some food home, else you'll starve. If you got thirsty, there was not a faucet. You had to walk miles. And if you read my book, I talk a lot about that, down to the stream to fetch water. Those were the realities of life. But the one thing they taught me is not only hard work, excellence was the only banner they told me I should carry my whole life in anything that I do. And I remember I share a story with you in the book. We were sitting in the hut, and I saw this family. They may have been from Europe, in a Volkswagen, and they showed up on the dusty roads in the village. And my mother called me and says, Nche? I says, yes. He says, you see those folks? They were European, American maybe, a family. Look very happy. I says, yeah. He says, you see, they look like they have very comfortable lives. I want you to work hard, learn everything in school so you can grow up and be like them. Not because she wanted me to transform my phenotype, no. but she saw in him something that can bring value to me, objectively. And that meant I wouldn't have to embrace frivolity. No, I had to work hard. So they taught me to work hard and to strive for excellence in all I do. Another thing they taught me was something that is always referred to in the context of collectiveness. Ubuntu. I am because you are. The interconnectedness. If we're so interconnected, for all of us to progress, we have to bring value in the relationship, and we have to be concerned about each other, what happens to each other. So you can't stand on the sidelines, you can't be flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, not being able to, or not willing to influence the events around you. So they taught me to be engaging, to be concerned about the welfare of others. They taught me humility. And being humble doesn't imply you think less of yourself, but you think of yourself less, and you're concerned about others. They taught me gratitude. Wherever you are in this world, somebody said before, somebody helped you to get there. To appreciate the effort, the concern, the assistance, the engagement of others in helping you advance through life. And they taught me forgiveness, which means don't wallow in all the bad that may have happened to you. Forgive, but look forward. When you wallow, you lose the opportunity to evolve and grow. And as I look around today where people want to lay blame on others, it takes me back to that time, and I have an even greater appreciation for those values. Forgive. Because as I've always said, if you're driving at 100 miles an hour, and life is fast, our time on this earth is short. If you're driving at 100 miles an hour and you keep your eye on the rear view mirror, what's going to happen? You'll crash. Sometimes you have to say, okay, I've got an agenda ahead of me. Those are the values that I learned in that village, among many other things. And so at age 3, I was agitated. I wanted to go to school because I had an older cousin, about 4 or 5 years older. You read about him in the book, Thomas. He had been enrolled in one of the missionary schools. We didn't have a lot of schools then. Think about it. And most kids had to walk a minimum of maybe 2 miles, sometimes 20 miles to get to school, believe it or not. And kids would go away and stay in another village for the week and come back weekends. But I was agitating so much that my mother says, we got to find him a school. So I went to a school and got rejected. If you read in the book, went to another school. They said, he's too young. And I kept agitating. And one day an uncle came and said, there's a brand new school that the Baptist missionaries have just opened in a hut. And my mother didn't ask she didn't want to know any details about this school. 2 words, he goes. And really not because she had this, love for education for me. She just wanted to get me out of her face. And when I started school, something happened to me. I never really came back to the village psychologically. I was there physically. I began to learn stuff. Math, languages, geography, history, the world. It opened up a whole new universe to me. I would come home and my enthusiasm became infectious. My mother didn't know what I was learning, neither did my dad. They were illiterate subsistence farmers. So what would they do? They knew whatever I was learning had value. They couldn't fully conceptualize it. They would sit up in the hut on the kerosene light and watch me study. And sometimes I was like every kid, and some days you didn't feel like studying. My mother would grab my hand and say, sit down, and she'd hand me the book, and sometimes she'd hand it upside down. I had tremendous respect for my parents. Actually, I feared them. And then I'd start reading and the book is upside down. I didn't want to turn it the right way because she didn't know which side was up and she would think I was playing with it. She didn't play. And so I learned to read upside down. And sometimes I would look up hoping, this witch, I hope she's, no, she's still sitting there watching. And it's a true story. And 10 years of age, I'm coming back from school one afternoon. I had to trek every morning, you read about it, miles. I'd have to leave in the morning. Maybe if I was lucky, I find a mango or an avocado that had fallen off a tree along the way. That was my lunch. But I was coming back from school this afternoon, trekking back to the village, and I ran into an uncle. His name is Simon. And he looked disturbed. And I go, Uncle Simon, what's the problem? He goes, your mother's in the hospital. She'd gone to give birth, and she needs blood. There's something a child doesn't want to hear in association with their parent in a sentence. Your mom, your dad, blood. So I took off to the only hospital in the province. It was called Bamenda General Hospital. And when I walked into that room, there were two people. There was a nurse standing in the corner, and I can see her now, who had her arms up in the air. She was crying. And all she kept saying was, there's no doctor, there's no doctor. And I looked in the corner, and I saw blood flowing out of my mother's groin and making a puddle beneath the bed. She'd given birth, and she was bleeding profoundly, profusely. And so when she heard my voice, she goes, son, go home. I'm dying. These are the exact words. And I ran across and I grabbed her hand. One grabbed her hand and grabbed her leg with the other hand. And I cried. I says, Mommy, please don't die. And she kept repeating, son, I'm dying. Go home, go home. She didn't want me to see her die. I stood there, and eventually she did die. And when I left that hospital room, trekking back at midnight to the village, crying my eyes out, the words that kept ringing in my ear are, there's no doctor. Now, I'd never seen a doctor personally, like the vast majority of people who lived in the village. They only had one doctor in that provincial hospital. He was tied up in the village somewhere, probably delivering babies in huts. And so the helpless nurse was left there alone. She could handle most problems, but this is excessive hemorrhage. Requires expertise that was not available. It was that moment that I decided that I wanted to be a doctor so no other child would have to experience what I just experienced, and no parent would have to suffer like she had before dying. That same year, I enrolled at one of the most exclusive secondary schools in Cameroon. It's called Sacred Heart College. They didn't have room in the first year. And as you read in my book, importunity, persistence. My uncle would take me there every day and plead with this missionary. Eventually, he just got tired of us and he goes, okay, there's no room in the first year. All we have is the second year. He goes, he'll take it. I'd never heard of chemistry, physics, math, biology. And all these kids in the second year had already had a year of all these sciences and math. And I started secondary school in the second year. And I flunked every test. It was miserable, but I didn't stop. The words of my parents kept ringing in my ear. Excellence. I worked hard, and eventually I graduated at the top of my class. I had wanted to go to America because the opportunities were just not there in Africa. I had met an American Peace Corps volunteer. I just enjoyed reading so much that he was drawn to me, and he would feed me books. I believe he was from Tucson, Arizona, an American Peace Corps volunteer. And he would feed me books. I'd read them almost every day. I'd be going through a book. And he talked to me about America. And one day he said, son, he says, you need to consider going to college in America. He says, in America is the land of opportunity. If you work hard, I always remember, if you work hard, you will be successful and you will be the doctor that you want to be. It wouldn't be long before my father would sell our land and sell the hut. And he got $300 and bought me a one-way ticket to New York City, to JFK. The family, the tribe got together and donated what amounted to $20. And on August 28th, or 29th, I left on the 28th. On the 29th, I arrived in New York City, as you read in the book, with $20 in my pocket and a lot of hopes and dreams in my heart. It wasn't easy. As you can imagine, in New York City, within a couple of hours, I was scammed out of my money. I was penniless. My destination was Baltimore. I'd applied to a lot of schools in America. I was just talking to Ken. I'd applied to Davidson College. I'd applied to Duke, Yale, Harvard. And all these schools, they had me take an exam called SAT, so they sent it, and missionaries sat in the room with me to supervise, and I took it. And then I started to hear from every college in America, and I didn't understand what it all meant. But you know, not having mentors, my criteria was tuition. So I would open the brochures. In those days, they send you brochures. And I said, what's the tuition? Oh, okay. And I get sticker shock. And so I saw in the library a list of American schools and what the tuition was. And there's one school in Baltimore called Coppin State College. It was like the lowest tuition in the US, like $200. So I got a pen and I sat down and did the math. I'd heard if you work hard in America. So I said, if I make $1 an hour, and yeah, I think I can put myself through school. That's where I'm going to go. And so a Good Samaritan in New York gave me bus fare. I arrived in Baltimore just to find out it's a day school. As I look back, I could have applied to UNC. I could have applied to Duke, and I would have had full scholarship because of my grades. I didn't know that. And so I wound up at the YMCA, crying my eyes out and drinking water from the faucet. I'd never been that high up from the ground in the air. I was on I think the 8th or the 9th floor. Didn't know anybody at all alone, until a Good Samaritan, a student from Morgan State University who was there that summer, came and knocked on my door. He looked at the register and he'd seen that I checked in, and it kind of asked you what languages you spoke. And he saw that I spoke French. And he was a language major. So he knocked on the door. And he would subsequently show up every morning with peanut butter sandwiches. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing here today. And he sent out a clarion call. He worked part-time on the college radio station and asked if anybody in Baltimore would be willing to help. And a few weeks later, somebody came and took me to their house. I went on, worked hard, transferred to college in Massachusetts, had 2-3 jobs, tutoring students on campus, mathematics and sciences, to put myself through college and earn a bachelor's degree. And then onward, did a PhD in chemistry. And then went to medical school. And I don't know if there are any physicians in the room here, but medical school, things move, and she knows, at the speed of light. And so I continued my tutoring work to earn money in medical school. There's very little time in medical school for anything. There's not enough time to learn all the material to train somebody to become a doctor. There's so much stress. Things are going at jet lag speed in medical school. Professors, medical students. And I continued to tutor. Eventually, I finished, did my residency, Cleveland Clinic, Harvard Medical School, finished in cardiothoracic surgery. And then I decided educational excellence was something I was going to pursue forever. So I started to engage myself in mentoring programs for disadvantaged kids in all the places where I lived: Cleveland, Ohio, Boston, Massachusetts, and subsequently in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I've been practicing all these years. And then I decided to travel the world and do free surgery, pediatric heart surgery. And so I worked with Doctors Without Borders, did some of the first surgeries in Cambodia, South America, Africa, and the first pediatric heart surgeries in West Central Africa and Cameroon. And I says, I traveled and did, but it was a team effort. It was a high performance team, people who had expertise in their various areas. And then I went back and I looked and I thought about my experiences in college. And many of the kids that I would mentor now as a professional, as a doctor, I thought these kids were very bright. But I go back to the college days and I go, I was new in America, and I go, these kids have all the resources. They have scholarships, they have everything, but they're struggling. It didn't make sense to me. And many of them were so frustrated that they would quit. And oftentimes it was the minority kids. And I say minority kids, I say specifically the black and the Hispanic kids. I had an interest in helping them. I was always there. They call me up and says, I have problems with this chemistry, like, can you help me? This math. The concepts were really easy at a college level, but you needed the preliminary knowledge, the fundamentals, which they didn't have. And the same thing in medical school. And it really hit me in medical school when a few of the guys that I knew, my friends, had to quit. And I can tell you today, it's like yesterday, they looked at me and they says, we just were not prepared for this. That hurt. And then I discovered this whole thing called affirmative action. What good was it to push these kids and put them in such a challenging environment? This is not a sustainable solution. This is a quick fix. They were used as pawns by somebody pushing policies that bring no value to them and society in general. And so that's why a few of them succeeded. A few of them took the longer route, maybe 5, 6 years in medical school, as you'd know. But unfortunately, there were a lot of them who quit. And I looked at these policies, they were in contradistinction to what my illiterate parents in a grass hut village knew: excellence. You got to be prepared. You got to do the work. And I realized there are two determinants of success in life. There's the individual mandate. A lot of them just didn't have it in them. They were smart. They have tremendous potential. And what hurt was they just didn't have the drive. Something had done wrong to them. And then the second mandate is society, community mandate, family mandate. There was this anti-intellectualism that was so pervasive in the families and the environments where they came from as I got to know them. I look around and I says, globally, people say, well, they're dumb, they're not smart, they're this, that, and the other. I saw all the crime in the communities where these kids were coming from. And I said to myself, did affirmative action really do them any good? Were we trying to address a symptom as opposed to addressing a problem, a sustainable solution. If you treat a fever with Tylenol, they'll die from a pulmonary abscess, a lung abscess. You need to go to the root cause and address it. We know that in medicine. And I come back and I look at the statistics. And where we are now in North Carolina, I see where the black population here, and understand, a lot of people, they're so-called intellectuals, and I think they're wallowing in the egotism, and but they're not really concerned. I'm a doctor, I'm a heart surgeon. I just want to do the right thing for others. Like her, as a doctor, that's my commitment. I'm not racist, whatever that means. Racism is a human creation. We're all human race. We're all from different tribes. And so I don't make any decisions girded in political expediency. But if I look at this state, in particular, with a black population of about 25%, and only about 5% of them who are physicians. And I look at a state where over 25% of black children, or black people, over 25 years of age, less than 25% of them, less than 25% of them over 25 years of age have a high school diploma. That's serious. And if I look at the Asian population, 3% approximately in this state, and about 17%, an astronomical number of doctors of Asian descent. There's something we have to learn, and it's the inconvenient truth. That's what I talk about, addressing problems from a root cause, seeking sustainable solutions. And let me throw a statistic at you that's going to bother you. In the United States of America, and this applies here to North Carolina, if you're talking about educational success and achievement, college degrees, 45% of college graduates are African immigrants in America. That's followed by Asian graduates. 43% of the graduates are Asian. 28% are those of European, Canada, and Russian heritage. And guess what the American born is? 22%. And yet our policy leaders seem to think that you can fix this. UNC, a great institution, I think their focus is on the wrong way. Let me tell you why. The admission rate for medical school here is what? About 4%. Think about that. What are you going to do? You need to be picking the most qualified candidates. The most precious commodity on planet Earth is the human body. You can't compromise that. I'm not saying you exclude others because of this hue, the melanin hue, or whatever. No, that's not what it's all about. Black people will tell you, Hispanics will tell you, they want the best doctor. It's not racism. It's doing the right thing for humanity. So if you have to pick 4% of the candidates and you start to compromise because you're kowtowing to a policymaker sitting somewhere and pushing papers, you've done injustice to humanity. That's a crime against humanity, if you look at it. Because the most precious commodity on this planet is human life. And guess what? We have gone through the agrarian revolution. Some people are still stuck there. We went through that to the industrial revolution. And sadly, most of us, a lot of us are still stuck there. And many people don't realize the industrial revolution is past. Where we are now on planet Earth is a knowledge-based economy where excellence prevails. You gotta have the right tickets. There's no affirmative action in global commerce. I'll let that sink in for a second. No affirmative action in global commerce. China, India, the European countries, our friends, while they're moving at jet-lag speed in educational excellence, bringing the communities together, people advancing in science, engineering, and whatnot, we're here pushing a checklist called diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action. Checklist. I've seen one from UNC. And guess what? We're here trying to address generational suffering by injecting generational guilt. You want to think about a way to destroy communities and societies? If we're not together, we're lost. And I'm not talking about uniformity. What I embrace and what we should all embrace is unity, not uniformity. The beauty of America is that we're not uniform. But the beauty of America is that we can unite. It's about the agenda. It's about the mission and the vision. I've spent quite a bit of time traveling the world. God has blessed me. And when I go to work, everywhere I travel, I visit an elementary school because elementary schools are a microcosm of societies. And not too long ago, I was in China, sat in a classroom, and as I listened to the students, they were learning, taking lectures in English, and then it came to science, and then third grade, they were learning coding. I went back to the Sheraton Hotel in Beijing, and if there was ever a time when I've never smoked cigarettes, never had alcohol, but if somebody gave me a joint, I would have embraced them at that point. I was in a depression when I thought back about America. We're wasting our time fighting each other, promoting policies that divide people instead of unite them, creating guilt in those who refuse to abide, those who choose to think independently. UNC should spend its time here, and I use that as a case in point where I am. I got nothing bad. No hate in my heart for anybody, and I don't hate UNC. I just hate policies that people embrace that don't bring value. If you look at this state, and she knows she can educate me. One of the highest incidents of obesity in America. Diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, #1 cause of death, cardiovascular disease and cancer. Maternal mortality. And all these things I mentioned, guess what the incidence is in the minority community? In the black community in particular, 2 times what it is among the white community. UNC has some things they can do to prove themselves and prove value to the communities they serve. Or allow their physicians, it's tough enough to be a doctor, to focus on these things to bring value to people, than to put them under additional stress. Medicine is already so stressful a profession because some bureaucrat decides that there's a policy that will help, really, it's just helping them. So we've created a whole cadre of professionals, I call them the checklist professionals. Meanwhile, the people out there are facing all these issues. And just the other day, I was reading about homicides. In North Carolina, the incidence in the black community is 5 times what it is in the white community. That's a problem. The graduation rate in North Carolina, Asians top the list, 95% in high school. Whites, 90%. Blacks, the best of statistics, and I had to pick the best number because this wasn't looking good, 83%. So, one day I was sitting in Cambodia near the Mekong River. I had gone there to do pediatric heart surgery. I was stressed. And the river looked very polluted. It was right behind the Cambodiana Hotel. And And I was thinking, I said, this is a beautiful river, starts up somewhere north, goes through Vietnam, Laos. And I started thinking about America, the analogy. We're always blaming the river. It's not the river. It's the pollutants. It's the industries. It's the policies. The river gets the blame. I lived in Cleveland, I know. When people ask me, where are you from? I say Cleveland. They go, oh yeah, your river catches on fire. The river gets blamed. Nobody was talking about the industries, the costs. There comes a time when people need to straighten their backs out and say what's inconvenient and stand for what's inconvenient. And I say we need to fight and allow the doctors here, allow UNC to be famous for quality outcomes. Because these doctors, healthcare givers, are distracted. If you're fighting amongst yourself, you can't go far. You understand? And the psychological, when you start creating angst and guilt and mandates, we know what happened with mandates and COVID. And since nobody's agreeing with that or taking responsibility for it, that's not how the human brain works. Doctors are not inherently racist or prejudiced. You can't bring a mature doctor in practice who spent his or her life saving lives, laboring, serving, and say, well, let me teach you now how microaggressions within you can impact. And we've created a whole industry. What value does that give? We're all interconnected. You cannot address what you see as generational suffering with generational guilt. America has had a great history. It's had a bad history, a regrettable history. We can't focus on that. The mere fact that I'm here today and that Ken is here today, society has evolved. This is a great nation, the greatest nation in the world. And as I come to my conclusion here, I want to remind you that in 1863, the Civil War was raging. And it almost tore this nation apart completely. There's some who seem to think that we're as divided today as we were about 160 years ago. We're in a crisis situation if that's true, and I believe it is. This is time for some soul-searching and critical thinking. We're at war. The policies that are being pushed out there are not right. If we need to address why minority kids, students, are not succeeding, we need to get to the root cause of it. All these solutions over the years have done nothing to help the process. Do you know what the percentage of doctors in America who were black were about 50 years ago? And I take you about 100 years ago. The numbers have not changed. Maybe the policy needs to be looked at. We're looking in the wrong place. The NAACP and also the National Board, that's the Minority National Medical Board, has tried many policies, many mentoring, this, that, and the other. But even they admit that it has not increased the numbers. And another thing, just your neighbor here, South Carolina, has a population which is of blacks which is greater. And I have to say, blacks are not the only minority, but let's face the facts. When we talk about the affirmative action and everything else, that's the group that is more often mentioned. 30% of the population in South Carolina. And the most they've gotten as far as African American or black physicians has been 6%. Every strategy they've tried, because they're looking in the wrong place. You don't show up at UNC and says, Now, you got to start learning to love him. And this is a checklist. You have to satisfy this, or you got to hire him because we need some of him on campus. Wait a minute. That's not how it works. It's not fair to him. You got to go back to those schools, back to those families. If you took away what people, and I say this, and people get the anal sphincters cringe. If you eliminated what people call white privilege, do you think it's going to change the situation among minorities, blacks and Hispanics? It's not. It's culture. I want UNC to be a drum major for educational excellence and to have people embrace excellence in those communities. To start at the elementary school level. That's where you start. And I'm going to just take you back briefly here. India got its independence, 1940s, and by 1950, Nehru became Prime Minister of India. And he determined that educational determinism was what was going to uplift India and bring it to par with the rest of Europe. And so he started medical institutes in every province, every part of India, and what? Schools of technology, schools of business. And even in the 60s, over 80% of people in India earned less than $50 a year. The population was about 300 million. You look that up. And now we're seeing they're reaping the benefits of those policies, attacking it. Education from kindergarten all the way up to high school. Excellence. And look at who is the CEO of many of our top organizations in America right now. Just think, Google, right? Microsoft, big Fortune 500 companies, they're of Indian heritage because they're qualified to be that. And if I want to make you give you something to think about, just a few days ago, I'm watching a commercial, and I'm not the guy that sits around and watches TV frivolously. I was watching PBS, and then my wife switched, as usual. She got tired of all this stuff. And a commercial came on, and it's telling. I wish I'd captured it, but it was a commercial by some headhunter company, agency. And it had this gentleman, disheveled, zombie looking, sitting in an office, standing in an office, the wall, surrounded by a wall of photos, Americans in the photos, ripping off a computer from the desk. And he said, in essence, if I had to do it again, if I had known what I know now, I would have hired the best talent. And if I had to do it again, I will look all over the world for the best talent. Just the other day, there's no affirmative action in global commerce. We'll have to stop this provincial thinking that is so pervasive, that it seeks to destroy this great nation. So finally, I think UNC should spend more time supporting its medical community to address so many of the problems that it's been confronting. The terrible outcomes, the problems, the clinical issues that are confronting the people are grappling with in this state. And maybe, if they want to go further, and I think they should, because they have power, it's up to them how they use that power to engage the leaders in this state and understand that these policies that are being shoved down their throat are not fair to the people that they serve. And maybe they can focus their energies to transform the educational process, because once you transform the educational process, what do? You transform healthcare. You transform employment issues. You transform housing issues. You transform security issues. In Philadelphia, I ran for governor a year and a half ago. And I'm going to tell you, I got to learn a lot. A lot of people run for office and they're just out there kissing babies. You know, they have sound bites. No, like a doctor, I went to work. I wanted to know about every pillar of government and society. What are the problems? 75% of kids who don't finish high school wind up in jail from the inner city. That's where we need to put our focus. And let's not let these people shove nonsense down our throats. We're here to serve and serve with a clear conscience. All of us. And I keep saying, doctors, you don't have to be a doctor. But they need a drum major, our children. Because every child in North Carolina is our child. I don't care what color they are. We all bleed red. I've seen that with a scalpel. A child in Seattle is my child. A little boy in Orlando, Florida is my son. We're all connected. And I'll just leave you with something. There's nothing new under the sun, my brothers and sisters. About 400 years ago, a metaphysical poet, John Donne, said something that still resonates today. No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent and a part of the main. And then he went on to say, any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. So never ask to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And I think this bell tolls for all of us today to be sure that these policies that divide us are cast in the junk heap of history. DEI, affirmative action, in the final analysis, it seeks to destroy us, divide us, polarize society. And that's not where America wants to be in an era where we're dealing with intense competitiveness in the global arena. Thank you.
That was a rewarding talk.
Yeah.
That was just hard hitting.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and then I want you guys to ask some questions for Dr. Zama. So my question is, you talked about how North Carolina has some serious, real problems, even racial problems that are racially stratified problems, facing a lot of kids in the education system, the healthcare system. Why do you think that blaming these problems on racism is not an effective solution? And where do you think that we need to start if we actually want to truly be effective as community leaders?
Yeah. I would start by saying, I believe if you ask any mother, father, any human being, whether they would choose excellence or they would choose diversity when it comes to their child, they would tell you that excellence trumps diversity any day. Now, we'll take that even further. I want diversity. But I want diversity with excellence, because it leaves all parties gratified. And so I think the focus needs to go back to the children, to the education, and keep the children and educational excellence front center. The problem in North Carolina, as it is in South Carolina, in Massachusetts, in California, and in Pennsylvania, is a pipeline issue. if you want to talk about human beings in terms of commodity or professionals in terms of commodity, it's a supply chain problem. The problem is here, but we're trying to address it here. That's not going to work. That's stupid, actually. I'm sorry, I'm a surgeon, I'm blunt. You need to go back here. If this person is not prepared, one of the most sinful things in the world is to occupy a position that you're not qualified for. It is not fair to you. These children here need an educational system that brings value to them. They need to embrace education. There's a famous African-American writer, and famous among most circles because some people seem to disagree with him, and he talks about this anti-intellectualism in some of the minority communities. We need to make knowledge and education sexy, just like basketball, just like football. And so what does that require? Go back to what I said earlier. Individual mandate for the children to know that it's important, and also the family. They need to own it. And we can do it. When I mentioned India earlier, somebody said it's always impossible, and I think it was Nelson Mandela, until it's done. Every long journey begins with the first step. So I think to be able to address, now, America, there's a tendency oftentimes for quick solutions, quick fixes. No, we need to start thinking this is so important, sustainable. Not something that will come to fruition within my term in the Senate or in Congress or in the presidency. No, because this is the right thing to do for the future. We may not be here. A lot of Indians who worked hard with Nehru never lived to see where India is right now, one of the biggest economies. So I think what we need to do is engage our legislators. Also, I'm telling you something I said in inner city Philadelphia, and when I was telling Kenny, when I was running for governor, my campaign manager was saying, geez, you know, you're so blunt. I says, no, I want people to see me as somebody they can trust. And I was going to go to South Philly, West Philly. You know, these are pretty rough areas. And I would speak to them the way I'm speaking now. And one time I'd spoken in South Philly, and I got up, and a couple of gentlemen came up to me, and they were crying, tears in their eyes. Says, nobody's ever talked to us. Because those folks, just like a lot of folks in North Carolina, Chapel Hill area, have been used for political ascendancy by, I call them political imperialists. They come here to exploit those communities. Those policies mean nothing to them. They articulate all these tactics and strategies that they know don't have meaning. They use those folks for political ascendancy. So I think to do that, we have to empower people in those communities. And we can do that. And what is this empowerment I'm talking about? To take responsibility, just like my parents did for the education. Kids see that, and it encourages them. Look at the Asian community. And I've got tons of friends in the Asian community. I've operated on countless patients, and when I do house visits and I sit there and I watch their kids study in the evening, and then I come back and I'm watching TV and I see maybe in South Philly, the kids have been caught up in the street with a police officer. And the question I would ask, as the question almost every African immigrant would ask, is what are they doing out of that time when they're school age? These are uncomfortable realities that you never hear on television. But you know what that requires? Leadership that speaks truth to power. And when you start to agitate as UNC and you say, we're not going to subscribe to this because this is what you need to do, that's when you're using your power positively. Because once the word is spoken, you can't retract it.
Yeah, and I also want to add also early childhood development too, as well. If you are a kid and you don't have a 10,000 word vocabulary by the age of 6 or 7, you are already so far behind in your education. You almost are certainly never going to catch up. And this is backed up by the education studies that show this. If you're not properly socialized to play together with somebody, you become basically outcasted from society. Not even by the time you're in high school, by the time you're 8. And so if you're a parent, reading to your children early on in your life and teaching them basic social mores is so important.
I agree with you tremendously. And I can stand here as an example of that. There's no hypocrisy here. You can understand what I'm saying. I spoke English fluently when I came to America. From a village, Google it, from parents who couldn't read or write, but like he was saying, they encouraged me to continue to read. They made reading and learning sexy. Their enthusiasm was infectious to me. My enthusiasm was infectious to them. I learned to speak proper English. Just think about it. A kid from Africa. My tuition was 250 francs a year, as you'll read in the book. Do you know what that is? 50 cents. My father couldn't afford it. We spent, and I think in North Carolina, about $20,000 per kid. In Philadelphia, $18,000. I ran for governor. It's going to be a radical transformation of the educational system. Some people thought on the campaign trail, well, we like you, but you're too smart to be governor. I came home, my wife's eyes popped out of her head, and when she heard it, we went to the next campaign, stopped, they said the same thing. I say, honey, this is a symptom of a greater malady, where now people are just, it's mediocrity we're talking about. They've embraced it. So yes, if that child at that stage has a limited vocabulary, if the child at that stage doesn't look at reading a book as something that has fun written all over it, and that's something that will impart value in their lives, we're starting, I didn't say we've lost a kid, we're beginning to lose that child. And key example here, just several years ago, and I see an African American sitting in the corner, and he may remember, in the 90s, remember before Bill Cosby fell from grace with the public, when he came out decrying the fact that there was a group of black people embracing a different language, Ebonics. You remember that? And so-called black intellectuals who said, yes, that's okay. That's a symptom of the malady, I'm telling you. Where you're too whitey. If you want to stay in the library, if you want to speak proper English. And let's go back to that global arena I talked about. There's no affirmative action. The policies may force you to admit that kid to UNC. Did you do him a favor? No. When you capitulate, you've done wrong. In the global arena, is he going to speak Ebonics? Yes, he can. Would he survive in that competitive global arena? Gone are the days of provincial thinking. No, that kid would be destroyed. We need to embrace excellence from kindergarten, from childhood. And the parents need to take ownership.
One more question. Give us your thoughts on where UNC is right now in terms of their worldwide reputation, and where it could be if it could stop distracting itself with, a new task force to integrate social justice in the curriculum, which is what the School of Medicine released in 2020. A new commitment to foster anti-racism in its admissions process by racial preferences in admission. And also, obviously we have this huge tie-in with the government and with the sports complex here. But give us your thoughts on, you as an outsider kind of to North Carolina, where UNC has always been to you and where it could go.
I have friends who graduated from UNC Medical School, outstanding doctors. Men and women who I would have no hesitation if I needed some type of medical intervention or evaluation, I wouldn't hesitate to see them. But the truth must be told. Other things have clouded or overshadowed UNC's reputation. The question is, do you want to be known for sports? Or do you want to be known for medical excellence? And I think it's a slippery slope. We're very close to winning this war that would avert the destruction of the future of our nation. And what's the future of our nation? It's the future of our children. And the tragedy in life is people who have quit so soon they didn't realize how close they were to success. If UNC embarks and embraces this DEI, affirmative action policy, and it's not that none of us is here saying diversity is bad, no. But mandating diversity, mandating inclusion, and in hiring and promotion and this, that, and the other, it's a slippery slope. It will regret ultimately. And we've seen this time and again. People who either blindly or spinelessly engage and embrace something that they believe. Black doctors don't want to be treated specially. Lots of them. Trust me. They have a conscience. I don't want to be looked at as an affirmative action. When somebody is looking up at me with a scalpel, they want to be sure that, or a saw, or whatever, they shouldn't be looking up, they should be under general anesthesia, that I'm the most qualified person to do that. You understand? I wouldn't be comfortable with myself knowing that the general perception is that I'm here because of the color of my skin. That's wrong. Martin Luther King didn't support this, right? All the proponents, let me remind them, W.E. Du Bois, who wrote in 1899, The Philadelphia Negro, he didn't subscribe to this. He subscribed to educational excellence. Even Malcolm X used that as an example, who was very radical in his earlier years, and right before his assassination, Mark Twain said, travel is prejudice's worst enemy. He traveled overseas, around the world, and he saw how blacks, whites, Asians were interacting together. He came back and he realized for us to get anywhere as Americans, we have to start working together, right? Nobody wants to talk about that. So what are we trying to do here? Reinvent the wheel. So UNC has an opportunity. And I think it should be known for addressing, and she knows, many of the healthcare challenges in this state. And God knows, a mountain of them. They could be the drum major for that. They can blaze a path of clinical excellence and outcomes instead of being at the bottom of the heap. And I have to say that because institution as a whole, individual clinicians are there doing an outstanding job. But if your captain of your ship is not right, that ship is lost. And UNC should not be afraid to take a stance. You never go wrong in life when you take a stance for excellence. Trust me. And even future generations, the children of these, let me say minorities, that you're trying to protect, will appreciate your tenacity. If you're afraid to lose sight of the shore, you'll never explore new lands. I think they should stop the fear of losing sight of the shore and look straight ahead.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions now.
Sure, sir.
Yes, first off, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
What do you think is the purpose why this is occurring? And then, also, yeah, and what do you see in the future, and what do you think it'll take to change it?
Yes. There's nothing special about me, but my experience brings something special to the table. Because I can view America different than anybody in this room, and I assume you were all born here. And I have a point of reference. The legacy of slavery in America can account for so many of the challenges that all of us grapple, because as Americans, you can't escape a legacy collectively. But the unfortunate thing is that some have exploited that legacy and not just the African Americans, and I use that, or the Hispanics, because they're descendants of slaves. It's just, you say Hispanic, and oftentimes a lot of them are, whether you're from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and places like that, and some of the challenges. And so I think a lot of this is coming because from politics, people who want to kowtow to certain special interests. They want to satisfy a certain cohort in the population. It's the truth. If you look at Bill Clinton, he said one thing during his campaign. He said something different when he was president. When he was trying to get some support, he sang a different tune. And they changed depending on the circumstances. And also for the African American, who was year after year had some good leaders. And when I mention people like Martin Luther King was preaching unity among the races. Think about it. He wasn't preaching white superiority or black superiority and all this. We need to come together as brothers and sisters. But there's so many very articulate, very flamboyant black leaders who I will say today have done the greatest injustice to the black community because they're self-serving, but they're very credible. And then an event happened in June, I believe it was 2020, in a street corner in Minnesota. And I think that stirred up emotions. And it created this opportunity to revisit what solutions that have not solved, that have failed. This whole affirmative action thing. I'm not here to say that minorities, blacks and Hispanics, no, they've suffered. But I don't want wallow in self-pity. You understand? They've suffered. The ancestors suffered. There's no black person in America who was enslaved. There's no Hispanic who was enslaved. No. But what is it, you ask yourself now, that my ancestors, their sufferings have become my suffering? Is this now in the DNA or what? There are those in power who've seen this and chosen to exploit it. And that's why in my book I refer to politicians making safaris to communities. And think about a safari. You go and you enjoy, you're going for a purpose, get something out of it. Then you're gone. You're not going to live there with the lions and stuff. And they make their political safaris to the domestic colonies. And what do you do with a colony? You go there and you exploit it, you get the raw material, you get all that, and you leave them. They've capitalized on this. They've expounded on it. They've stirred it up. Somebody needs to speak truth to power. And that's what we need to do. That's where it started. And so there's white guilt. And it's not because white folks got up and they started feeling guilty. No. I'm standing here today because of white folks, because of Chinese folks, because of Indian folks, because of black folks. They've all contributed to my upbringing, if you really think about it. So I look at it different. But a lot of these miscreants get folks in the black community to say, that's your enemy, you've been suffering. This whole self-pity, chronic self-pity, this feeling of I mean, if you talk about marginalization, look at me. I'm in a country, I'm black, in case you can't tell by the hue. I don't have any resources, don't know anybody. You know what I mean? Vulnerable. I'm not protected by the US Constitution. You talk about vulnerability. Yet, I know that the opportunities are there, and I capitalize on them because I didn't have those psychological constraints, victimization constraints. People talk about the entitlement because my ancestors went through this, I deserved this treatment. That stuff doesn't get you far. I believe our kids need to learn the good and the bad about American history and say, yes, if this is the bad, let's make sure that the future is better than the bad that others experience. That's how you move ahead. Actually, that's good for you as an individual and then good for us collectively. So I think the problem is stuff that's passed down through generations, this whole self-pity thing, you know, wallowing in self-pity. And this, I call it cognitive anesthesia, numbed to it. And so this victimization, I think there's a lot of words they've used for it to describe it. You're not. And community needs to take responsibility. It's always putting blames on somebody else. The vast majority of the, when we talk about the homicides in this state, 5 times in the black community, greater than the white community, they're blacks perpetrating violence against each other. Nobody talks about that. I'm concerned about our brothers and sisters who happen to be black in those communities. I'm concerned about those children. You need to face the mirror and say, what are we doing wrong? It's not a bunch of Ku Klux Klan guys who show up and then says, let's go kill 100 today. No. It's happening in New York City and Philadelphia. All over. What's your son doing at 10 o'clock at night? That's why the white kid or the Asian kid got into UNC, because they were doing their homework. That's what the Africans say. And let me give you a statistics, the thinking. The most successful tribe in America, like I say, I don't talk about races because it's all human race. Academically, you know who they are? It's a take-home Nigerians. Over 60% with advanced degrees, PhDs, MDs. They're the quiet minority. And guess what the median household income is? Over $70,000. Kids get outstanding education. My children, by the way, when they were growing up, I never once told them that they're victims. And even when they heard that nonsense and came home, I said, you're only a victim if you choose to be. This is the greatest country in the world. I used to steal books in Africa. So an American Peace Corps volunteer said, hey, son, you don't have to do that. I was a book thief. I mean, I was a thief. If I saw a book I hadn't seen, I'll steal it and read it. He says, you don't have to do that. And if you read my book, he started to feed me books. I told my kids, you don't have to steal. I can write a check. You're not a victim. And one day my daughter came back and she was talking some nonsense about, well, education is not for, and I just reminded her, because I says, your slave ancestors were peeing and pooping on themselves in the bowels of slave ships. What's your excuse? I says, there are a lot of kids out there of all races who are waiting for you in the future. And your success will make a difference in their lives. I says, if I hadn't concentrated on doing my work and I worried about being a victim, I experienced racism when you read in the book. But that's just a distraction. Everybody's biased. I am too. One time I was watching the news and they said somebody had a mass shooting in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. In your mind, I didn't say it was a white person, but you just understand that it could. No, it was a black person. You're wrong. It doesn't mean I'm racist. You understand? It's just what you're used to seeing. You know what I mean? And so we're at a point where, and I told my kids, I says, you have to succeed because this society has all the resources you need. It'll be a travesty. And also, don't hate. Hate is too great a burden to carry. Think about it. When you hate somebody, you can't see straight. Blue is green to you. White is black to you. Red is purple to you. You can't advance because it takes up so much energy, you paralyze yourself. So there has to be that home family mandate for a child's success. And as I was sharing with him, my daughters, older one has a PhD and a law degree. Second one is working on a PhD. Third one is getting ready to go to college. But I found out that there's a liberal world out there now, and she's talking about this, that, and the other. And I says, no, there's no democracy here. Conservative values must be maintained. Now, after you achieve your diplomas and you have the qualifications, you can choose to embrace whatever type of thought you want, but you got to be prepared. When you go to a Nigerian family, you don't hear about Nigerians a lot. When people read the statistics, they go, yeah, I know one, I work with one, they work hard. But, so you look at a black kid who thinks, oh, I can't make it, I can't do this. The genetics are similar when a lot of African Americans trace their origin is from Cameroon, from Nigeria. So the question becomes, what happened? And that's what we need to get to the root cause. And we can. It's culture. It's embracing education. It's embracing reading. It's the parent taking time aside. The Asian, I have my Asian friends who, I mean, they're stressed like, man, I got to get an A. That's a standard. I know a guy, a very famous motivational speaker, Les Brown, who said, always aim for the stars. You may land on the moon, but you did well, didn't you? If you have a child who is aiming for excellence in all they do, they'll be successful. They may not always get the A's. They get an A+, A-, B+, but they'll be in a comfortable zone. But if you have a child in a family where they're pushing the priorities, basketball, baseball, you know, hate, they don't like you, this person is terrible, just think about, and she knows, and especially during a critical time of neurons, the cells that make up the brain, development, and the input, all this input. Think about how it impacts their growth. No wonder there has to be a radical transformation in our societies, how our people think, our children think, our parents think, and it's our responsibility.
That's great. I'll tell you why this matters. When you walk down this floor tonight, and you go down the first floor into the lobby of the Graduate, you're going to see these copies of the Daily Tar Heel. And on the front page of today's Daily Tar Heel, you're going to see a headline that says something like, "Baseball team at UNC lacks diversity." And this is the front page of the Daily Tar Heel, because this is which signifies what they think is the biggest news of the day, is that there are too many white people on the baseball team. And this is the message. If you think that this is anomalous, it's not. This is the message that is propelled into the minds and into the heads of every single college student in America every day. Every day, through DEI, through the newspapers, through their friends, through their professors, through the mandatory DEI statements their professors have to sign in order to get promoted. And it is a corruption of the mind. Because you know what DEI emphasizes? Everything but merit. Your surface level characteristics. Are you a woman? Are you a man? Are you black? Are you white? Are you gay? Are you a religious minority? Who cares? Who cares? And you know what's being lost in all of this? Did you work hard? Did you study for the test? Did you push yourself? Did you challenge yourself? You know, I was just, you know, I don't know, this is about Dr. Zama, but just me personally, I grew up in a Chinese American household. My parents actually were fairly loose, I would say, loose with what, they didn't push me like a tiger mother did or anything like that. And I just developed this passion for writing. And in a stricter household, my dad may have just yanked me and said, no, focus on math. But they just let me write my books, and I completed my first book when I was 8 years old. And then I wrote 6 more books by the time I was in high school. I wrote 6 more books. So I did the 10,000 hours that you're supposed to do to become a master at something by the time I was 21. And by that time, I had made maybe $100 in my life in revenue from anything that I had ever published. By the time I was 22, I made $100 in revenue, total. And then I came up with the idea for my next book, An Inconvenient Minority, which is, by the way, about the Harvard and UNC cases facing Asian Americans, the admissions crisis, the decline in meritocracy. And I signed, it was my first book that I was able to get an agent for. And in the next 2 years of my life, after I spent the 10,000 hours already writing my book, where my total income output was $100, you know, I made 100 times as much of that in 1 year. So the things, the rewards that you get in life, they don't scale linearly. They scale exponentially, in that you're not going to see the fruits of your effort for a very long time. That's the kind of delayed gratification that maybe an Ubuntu culture or maybe a traditional conservative Chinese culture will teach you to delay gratification. Because that ultimately is what's going to produce the exponential results.
You know, yeah, it's absolutely right. during the campaign, I would say, even in debates, I went through about 13 debates with the gubernatorials in Pennsylvania. And I said, and candidates, they talk nonsense and they really don't want to go deep into policies. They don't understand, it's about kissing babies and cutting ribbons. And I said, there's so many geniuses that America doesn't know about that are languishing in our inner city ghettos. Geniuses. But you got to nurture them. You got to bring it out of them. And, but also, we're so divided, and I want to talk about liberal politics. I don't know who in here consider themselves a liberal, but it's kind of a nebulous term, but I talk about liberal politics. They've always talked about the model minority. And who are the model minority? They're the Asians, right? Because they show up in America from boats, from Vietnam or Cambodia or somewhere, China, and, they work in these soup kitchens. Next thing you know, the kids are doing well, graduating from good schools, getting, they're well behaved, they work hard, they're disciplined. You don't see them in the evening news, And the liberals like to push that. And they said, until the numbers go up, their numbers, and then they start talking about, oh, no, you can't. So Harvard, my alma mater, starts talking about, well, there's too many Asians who are qualified. Isn't that a good thing? You eliminate diversity, equity and inclusion, and you start to do some of the things that we need to do to transform the culture in those communities, there'll be an explosion of minorities who are highly qualified. And as he said, it wouldn't be tomorrow, but that's a tremendous investment in the future. Because every mother and every father, even if they're disconnected from their child's academic performance, means well and wants well. But you provide them with the algorithms, with the leadership that'll transform them. Quick example, there's a community called Johns Creek, about 25 miles from Atlanta, where there was a massive white exodus to Forsyth County. Did you hear about that? And this is an article I read in 2016. I encourage you to Google and read it. And so one of the folks was asked, why are you moving out of the county? And the lady who was interviewed says, well, my Nora is good at math. And many kids at whatever school she was at are good at math. He says, but it's not fair because the Asians get extra tutoring for their children. And it's had a negative impact on the self-esteem of her daughter. And she goes, because of the performance of the Asian kids, she's worried that her daughter may not be able to get into a good college because it's not a normal environment, the school. What's normal? And so I'm moving because it's a more normal, natural, realistic place to live. So a lot of people in liberal leadership have contributed to some of the problems that we have because they encourage these kids to be out marching in the streets, breaking windows, whereas their kids are staying home and doing homework even afterwards. You understand? They amplify many of the problems that we now see, and we need to be very cognizant of that. And I've told people on the campaign trail in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, so some of the people that you think are there to support you are really there to exploit you. And you need to dig deep inside the wells within you to come out with what's important for you, your children, and the future of your progeny. And it really gets them thinking. And that's what we need to do here in North Carolina. We need to tell the people at UNC to get stronger backs. Do the right thing. And what's the right thing for the future of this state? We're all going to die, everybody. And the most important thing is not that you lived, it's the legacy that you left. And so I think we're all, assuming you're all in the same path, we're on the right road, and we have to fight this. And it's a winnable war.
I know that you might feel like you're just one person, but here's what I would encourage you to do. We have a petition going on at colorusunited.org. It is our petition to restore merit-based standards at UNC and to eliminate DEI and to refocus North Carolina on being literally the most excellent healthcare system it possibly can be. Please go to our website and sign our petition. Every signature helps, especially if they're from North Carolinians. State legislatures are paying attention to UNC right now. The Wall Street Journal has released 3 articles about UNC over the past month. We're really focusing attention on medical excellence and these standards. And here you can also see all of the facts about what's going on at UNC School of Medicine as well. These things work. Colorus United has led a campaign to target a $5.4 billion organization, the Salvation Army, last year, where they were saying that their members need to repent, lament, and apologize for racism, even though Salvation Army officers are the most likely people to go into Black and brown communities and help them find food, housing, and shelter to save their lives. They should not be the ones being admonished for quote-unquote racism. And we got 18,000 signatures for that and forced the Salvation Army to rescind and apologize for that document and to take out their unconscious bias trainings. And we are leading this movement to restore merit-based standards and against DEI. So we've decided we're going to target UNC Medical School and the policies that they're doing, because this is a state that's ripe for change. There are legislatures who are going to hear us out. I'm here. Dr. Zama has graciously offered his time to speak. But we need to be supported by the voices of people. And so I'd love for you guys to go to our website, colorusunited.org. And
just to remind you, today the statistics that came out in the news have shown that over 62% of Americans are not in favor of DEI, affirmative action policies. And a significant number of those are African Americans. You read it. Yeah. I didn't write it. Yeah.
Please, other questions?
I guess I have just one more.
Sure.
Might as well ask. Talking about social justice.
Yes.
There's been a lot of push for social justice within medicine, not just regarding placement, increased amount of that of minorities, but regarding who to save and who to work on, who's priority, and a push among many within the medical community about that. Whether or not it's been passed or not is another question, but there is a pressure in that aspect regarding social justice. What is your opinion of that?
You mean social justice in terms of
like who to favor in terms of medicine, in terms of maybe saving a life, in terms of where resources go.
Allocation of resources?
Allocation of resources and maybe preferential treatment.
Absolutely not. If there's any preferential treatment in life, let God be the one that makes that decision. And in the sake of, in the interest of fairness, which is what we, first of all, as a doctor, you take an oath, is do no harm. That's encompassing. You know, I have to treat everyone fair. And sometimes if I have to distribute resources thinly to save lives, I would have to. But sometimes I have to prioritize. There's something called triage as well. And every doctor knows when they see if you're confronted with 2 cases, 2 patients, and you can make a decision based on data, the presentation of data, which one of those patients is in a greater critical situation and has a greater likelihood of a bad outcome. And then naturally you would focus a little bit more and lean a little bit more on them to save their life. And that's what we've done in medicine, and it's worked. But to come in and inject mandates and policies that in a way are discriminatory. You see, people talk about discrimination and racism, but yet again they promote stuff that is racist and discriminatory. And that should have no place, absolutely no place in medicine. And you see, people don't understand the medical, when you're a doctor, you deal with life and death. It's not like, should I put this muffler in this car? Why, this is a Volkswagen and, you know, this is kind of an expensive muffler. Maybe I should just put a Pinto. No, this is human life. And so you can't play games with human lives. And I think politics should stay out of it, really. Politics should stay out of it. And that's why when we talk about diversity and inclusion, yes, I want Asian, I want whites, blacks, I want Hispanics all working together, because that's America, you understand? And yes, if you don't have enough of the blacks are not as represented, or the Asians are not in proportion to the numbers in the population, well, and that's important. Well, let's find equitable ways to do that that are fair. See the word fair and equitable. What's fair? Fair means qualified. You got to be qualified. And so when you start making allowances for quotas, then you're no longer practicing medicine. And as anybody in healthcare, you have a responsibility to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this. Because, see, the thing in life is that there are a lot of people who are the silent majority who would support you. But oftentimes people don't stand up. It's until they stand up do they realize, wow, I'm not standing alone. As doctors, we need to toe the line as healthcare providers, and we can't allow that to happen. I always ask those who promote this, and they come to me because I'm very outspoken about it, and they go, so I asked them, I says, if you were really sick now, what do you want? Do you want the guy who was struggling through medical school, they barely pushed him through? Not because they're not smart. I always say that. We have geniuses, but they're just unprepared. You know what I mean? If you're going to battle, you could be the strongest looking man or woman, you join the Marines and stuff. But if you're not trained and prepared in the tactics and strategies of you get creamed. And so many of these guys graduate and then can't even pass their boards. Is that who you want? No, you don't. So you're a hypocrite. Why would you push these policies, but then you expect a higher standard, a standard of excellence? Can't we just have everybody excellent? And those that have not met that, let's go back and say, why are they not? Let's prepare them, that pipeline. That's what this pipeline, nobody's talking about it. Because it's not convenient. But we will never solve this problem, my brother. In 100 years, the percentage of African American doctors has not changed in America. Take this to the bank. It's not changed.
It's powerful.
Yeah, 100 years. So you say, what's all this DEI stuff about then? Somebody's trying to reinvent the wheel? Because what our leadership has been carrying this banner, they've been trying to quick fixes, political fixes, policies that are not geared towards sustainable solutions, because that takes more hard work, you understand? You know, You don't want to go home and cook a real meal and eat well, be healthy. You want to drive through somewhere and pick up something that's going to clog up your arteries. You want to give somebody a Tylenol, I always ask them. Their fever goes away, but they got a lung abscess. And the longer you wait, that infection will get in the bloodstream. And when it starts screaming because you have sepsis, then you got to do something. But you know what? Your mortality at that point is about 50 to 75%. That's how you begin to destroy a nation. And meantime, our enemies overseas like that. Napoleon said one time, he's a brilliant strategist. You may not agree with a lot of the things he did, the Russian campaign, the Egyptian campaign. I love history. But at the end of the day, he said, don't disturb your enemy when they're making a mistake. And America is making a lot of mistakes. And I think this is a big mistake, this DEI, affirmative action. If I was in South Philly and people got up and cried when I says, look at all these geniuses, the little kids running around in the room. I says, I shudder to think what will happen 10 years from now. Y'all remember Mr. Wise, and there's another gentleman, Mr. Lang, millionaires who offered to undergird the educational career of sixth graders in a city. One guy in New York, he sponsors about 200 and something, the guy in Philly, 112 kids. He says, I'll pay your tuition, I'll take care of everything if you just graduate from high school and I'll pay your tuition through college. I encourage you to go home and look at the statistics, what happened to those kids. You know, about half of Wise, W-E-I-S-S, philanthropist. And then the other guy is Mr. Lang, L-A-N-G. I think Lang, if I'm not mistaken, was New York, and Wise was in Philadelphia. He's still alive. Lang died, I think, 2017. And about half of the girls were pregnant even before they finished high school. So I'm not just blowing smoke. You gotta go to the root cause of it, because all these quick fixes are not gonna lead us anywhere. And UNC, it's a brilliant institution. They should know this. It ain't gonna work. History will not look kindly on them, because they walked into this and turned it into a checklist institution when they should be top in science, medicine, and technology. I want to go to my grave, like all of us, with a clear conscience. Life is not a popularity contest. Just do the right thing. And eventually, somebody's life will be impacted positively when you're gone, you know, because we're all interconnected.
Thank you, Dr. Zama.
Yeah, thanks.
Dr. Zama is the first of many speakers we will be bringing here. We will be concentrating fire on UNC, and both in the national media and in all of the local events that we're doing, because there's just so much evidence that UNC Medicine is pursuing the wrong direction. They are indulging in DEI. They are lowering their standards for admissions. They've already made their step one test pass-fail. They have instituted racial preferences in admissions. They have mandatory DEI statements for their medical professors to get promoted and hired. There's just so much evidence leaking out that this institution is going in the wrong direction that you have to expose it. And you have to concentrate national attention as well as bring in locals to come and hear people like Dr. Zama, quality speakers, come and speak. So you will not be hearing the last of us, in other words. With all that being said, it's an exponential effort, and we're really, really glad that Dr. Zama has volunteered his time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for my
Will this video be on YouTube or anything?
Yeah, it'll be on our Color Us United YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. Just go to Color Us United. Just search Color Us United on YouTube, and you'll find it.
I invited a few people, but from Raleigh,
yeah,
a little further, maybe they couldn't
And he's actually doing a 2-day tour. Tomorrow's event will be in Raleigh. That one got a lot of interest on Facebook. This one, we really catered it out to medical students, staff. You know, this is the first they're hearing of us, so maybe they didn't see much into it, but you know, it's only going to continue from here. So, but yeah, he will have another event in Raleigh tomorrow.
Where is that going to be?
That's going to be at the Crabtree Marriott tomorrow, 6:30. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you can find it on our Facebook page.
Be the same presentation, Master?
Yes, but the audience will be different.
Okay.
Because the event is titled "How Wake County is Turning into Woke County."
Okay.
I'm going to touch on other issues. There's just a broad area tomorrow. Yeah.
Maybe I'll come again.
Okay, sure.
He's pretty great.
It
What can you
does,
say?
Yeah. Thanks.
Your story's incredible.
Yeah, thanks. It's the greatest country in the world. It's the greatest country. And we have to pass on an even better country to our offspring. But if we keep embracing these types of policies, maybe we wouldn't have a country to pass. Because China's GDP is inching closer and closer to America.
What you're saying about the root cause is, I mean, it's so logical. So
It's logical.
but it's like escaped almost everybody.
Well, I tell you, I'm a PhD chemist, so I get up in the morning, and after driving my wife crazy and she leaves, I read a science journal, Global, and I was reading just last week, China generates the most research articles now in scientific journals globally than America. We're asleep. People don't know what's going on.
And think of all the...
And guess what the articles were generating? DEI, affirmative action, I hate you, you hate me. We're living in the past, China's in the future. You understand? It's a difference. I mean, technologically, I have a conservative American, a patient of mine, billionaire, very wealthy, and we talk often. I thought I was conservative. He leaves me in the dust. He goes to China, and and this is a guy his mother's English and his father, they're from Iowa. He was in World War I, a pilot. I mean, he's very American. He comes back and he goes, he calls me Dr. Z. He says, Dr. Z, in many ways, they're 50 years ahead of us. I said, the stuff the media is feeding us here is not real. Because education, the push. You know what China was doing just a couple of decades ago? Hiring outstanding American graduates, whether it's from UNC, Davidson, Duke, to teach English around the world, offering top salaries, luring professors from Harvard, all the top places. That's been ongoing. The universities they didn't rank anywhere internationally just a couple of decades ago. Now if you look at the rankings, they're up there with some of the best ones. And here we are finding better ways to destroy each other. We don't care about the future of our children, do we? We're not going to survive as a people. When you talk about survival of the human species, I always ask people that. And I says, what's the real definition? It's very easy. It's children. That's survival. Because you and I, Shakespeare said all the world is a stage. Men and women are merely players. They have the exits and entrances. We've entered the stage. We're all on that stage now. What we do on this stage, the time that we're given on this stage is an impact and will determine what happens after we exit. And yet, while, you know, if you look at things even like climate change, this, that, and the other, and, you know, and I'm a progressive scientist. I mean, during the campaign trail, and it's funny, I got into politics, and, you know, my wife just every day she'll go, oh, you are crazy, you know? And I says, honey, we have to. I says, I have to do this, you know? And I says, but very few of these politicians really care. But actually, the people have more power than they do. But the people don't know that. They get hypnotized. They talk about climate change. And they talk about, we got to go carbon neutral by 2050. I said, wait a minute. First of all, the world will never be carbon neutral. Let's just think about it. It's not the way it works. I'm all for technology. Yes, electric cars are good. But tell me, as a scientist, what am I going to do with all these batteries? And we haven't worked that out yet, but we're working on it. That's good. You know? And so I says, politics is a dirty game. I says, well, honey, there's a difference between a common thief and a political thief. A common thief steals your purse, steals your wallet, steals your jewelry, steals your watch. A political thief steals, what do they do? They steal your future, right? They steal your freedom. They steal your education, you know? They steal your career. And think about it. But the irony is all, the common thief decides who to rob. They decide to rob you. No. The political thief, we invite them to rob us. And the common thief, you would do everything to make sure they crucify, they throw him in jail. And we would fight and defend that political thief. So politics is dirty. And if we decide to stand by, and this is what UNC is doing, if you stand by and choose not to get involved, then, yeah, it's a dirty business. They'll throw dirt on your future, your career, your health care, your education. If that doesn't move you, then maybe you're already dead and buried in dirt. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Very glad to be here.
I'm not sharing any like private information by saying this. Our ultimate goal, I just want to tell you, be very transparent with you. Our ultimate goal at the med school is to get the dean of the med school, UNC Dean Wesley Burks, to publicly denounce DEI. That's the goal. And you say, okay, words don't really matter, but it's definitely going to be the start of something if he does that, because medical schools across the nation are doing this. And if we can set a precedent here, we can set a precedent anywhere. And already things are starting to change. The Board of Governors is voting on February 23rd on the mandatory use of diversity statements for hiring, tenure, and promotion. It is likely they're going to vote to ban that, which will be great. That's the start. We have a big goal, but this is what we're doing.
Great.
All right.
Hi.
Hi.
Very nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Yes, yes, yes.
I saw that you do work in Elmira.
Yes.
I'm from Corning, New York originally.
No, you're not from Corning, are you?
Yeah.
I was the director of the Heart Institute at the Guthrie Clinic for about 9 years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So how would you do it? You commute?
Yes, so I lived in Elmira and I commuted there. And also I jump-started the program in Elmira with the Mehmet Oz.
Oh.
Yeah, the heart program had
Okay.
fallen out of, yeah.
I mean,
So,
moved away. I mean, it's been a long
yes,
time
so
since
I
we've
worked, I used to operate in Elmira, and one day I remember I did 6 cases, 3 in Elmira, 3 in the Guthrie.
Oh, wow.
But I like living in Elmira.
Yeah, yeah.
And
no,
I was
worked
teaching
in
at Cornell too,
Okay.
so it was close. It was only
Yeah.
20 minutes away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I graduated
Oh, wow,
from Corning East
you're
High
from
School.
Corning.
Yeah, yeah.
It's incredible.
It was an entrepreneurial town
Yeah.
at the time, although I think Corning Incorporated is now bought into all of
It has.
woke stuff.
Yes. Oh, it's changed. It's,
I just want to say, yeah, I did
Yeah.
general surgery here at UNC.
you did? Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Oh, you're a general surgeon?
Yeah, but I
Huh.
don't practice. I stay at
Oh,
home.
wow. Wonderful. Yes.
But I've been trying to expose all this stuff.
Yes,
too,
yes.
And when the pediatrics, I mean, it's not just the medical school, you know.
Right.
It views,
Right.
there are several doctors.
Right.
Who are too scared to speak out. I've
Right.
spoken to them that are forced into
Yes.
this diversity training, and they're just too scared for them.
And that's why they're not here today. People don't understand.
Yeah, they're
They're
scared.
scared. They're just,
Here we go. Here's what I want you guys to do. We have a petition circulating right now. It is on preventing UNC medicine from going down to wokeness, from bowing down to wokeness. And I want to be very clear with what we intend this petition to do. With your signatures and the signatures of North Carolinians, we are asking the UNC Dean, Wesley Burks, to revoke the Task Force for Social Justice and to say explicitly, we will commit to excellence and excellence only in our admissions and hiring. And we will teach only that which is medically relevant information for our students. And so I want you guys to go to our website, colorusunited.org, and sign the petition. colorusunited.org, right here. Boom. North Carolinians deserve better health care than what DEI provides. Do we want to be #1 in DEI, or do we want to be #1 in the nation in health care? We have plenty of opportunity. We're the 29th unhealthiest state in the nation. We have higher than average rates of diabetes, higher than average rates of Alzheimer's. And what Nche Zama and Dr. Zama has told us is that you can transform institutions from last to first. Why are we settling for anything less than the best in North Carolina? So tell your friends that. Tell your friends to sign our petition. With tens of thousands of signatures, we got the Salvation Army last year to rescind their task force to talk about racism, to blame their own officers for racism. And with tens of thousands of your signatures, we will do the same for woke healthcare. Yes?
Isn't it UNC where they also, isn't that where Dr. Tim Reeder is performing gender affirming surgeries on minors, I believe?
Yeah, he's definitely doing that.
Can that be worked into your petition to avert that?
Yes, yeah, and in fact, we are coming out with exposure and exposing the lowering of standards. What the real problem with this transgender affirming surgery is that
It's part of DEI too.
it is part of DEI, and it's what it.
That should be part of your.
It is. It's the lowering of scientific standards. There's no scientific standards to suggest that this is a long-term outcome that benefits these people. In fact, it's not. Go ahead.
I think this is a very crucial question, and it is obviously part of this. What we need to do here is have UNC disavow this, because that's where we are right now. And then the next step would be that, because that's a big one, because once they disavow it, you can approach that. Because gender is biology. I mean, as a physician, I can tell you categorically, you're taking perfectly healthy children and you're turning them into lifelong patients. There's a powerful platform there we have not pursued. But to do that right now may actually cause a little bit of, because these are major problems, major issues, but they're really a package. I think after this, that would be a very powerful one to take on, because you're taking that on from a position of strength at that time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Now, if anybody has any questions, and I'm really 100% supportive of what's going on here, and if you need to reach me, I'll give you my phone number and my email address. You can actually get it from him, or if you want, I can give it to you now. And just contact me if you're somebody who's a little resistant that you're talking to, and you want me to call them and talk to them, I will. And